Hello everyone, welcome to the session. I'm just going to give it a minute or two just to let people join and settle in, and then we'll get started with the content. So we'll be with you in about a minute. Hello to everyone who's just joined us. We're just giving it a few minutes just to let the last people join, and then we'll get started probably about 2 or 3 minutes past. Okay, we've got quite a few people with us now, so I think we can get started. So welcome everyone to the live session. Thank you for taking the time to join us today to learn more about Microsoft Fabric. So I'm Gemma, I'm the marketing manager here at Coeo, and I'm going to be facilitating today's session. Before we jump in, I'll introduce you to our speakers for today. So first up, we've got Matt Hill, who is Head of Technical Strategy here at Coeo. He leads our data and AI engagements and specializes in helping our clients get the most from Microsoft Fabric and the wider Microsoft Analytics stack. Supporting him is Sam Boot, who is a principal consultant here. He specializes in the design and delivery of Microsoft Fabric solutions and works hands-on with our clients to support their data platforms. We have got quite a bit of interesting content to cover today. There will be time for some questions. We'll get to those at the end, but if you have any questions as we go through, you can pop them in the Q&A feature. I've just popped a little topic conversation starter in there now, so if you've got any questions, leave your comments under that. I think that's all the housekeeping. So with that, I will hand over to Matt and Sam, and we can get started.
Fantastic. Thanks, Gemma. Welcome, everyone. So let's get started with what is Microsoft Fabric. So over the last couple of years, since Microsoft Fabric has been made generally available, there's been a lot of talk around both AI and Fabric. And so Fabric is Microsoft's all-in-one end-to-end data and analytics platform, with the biggest change being it's now provided as a software as a service platform. And what this means is that there's no individual components that you need to provision. There's no underlying architecture and management of these individual components like you would in traditional architectures. So before Microsoft Fabric, you would provision individual platform as a service components such as Data Factory, Azure Synapse. You would have Power BI as your reporting layer, or as such, or reporting services if you were still using SQL Server. And obviously what Microsoft have done, have rolled all of kind of those analytic components into one cohesive stack. And so Microsoft describe these components as workloads now. And what these workloads do is they target individual user roles, and they target roles such as data engineering, data warehousing, visualizations for reporting, business intelligence, and data science. And because it's a unified single platform, what Fabric does provide is that consistent user-friendly experience, which allows users to discover data and Fabric items far more easier than what you would in traditional platforms. But also it gives you that central administration and governance experience as well, with everything being in a single platform. And the best way to illustrate that is through this diagram. So what you're seeing on screen is the Microsoft Fabric platform. And as I described, those boxes along the top are what Microsoft describe as the workloads. So it's rolled several workloads into a single platform. So you've got Data Factory for data integration and orchestration. You've got data engineering, which is providing you that Spark engine, that notebook-driven way of being able to do data engineering activities. You've got data warehouse, which is powered by the SQL engine. Obviously, you've got data science capabilities to be able to create things such as machine learning models, but also integrate with kind of the open AI large language models as well. You've got real-time intelligence capability. So this is event-based and streaming data scenarios. Something that's recently been added into the platform is databases. So you can now run transactional workloads now within the Fabric platform. And of course, you've got Power BI, which has now been integrated into Fabric for that business intelligence layer and providing those semantic models. You've also got industry solutions. So Microsoft are now encouraging ISVs to provide specific solutions and making them available on the Fabric platform, which there are a few out-of-the-box industry solutions that come with Fabric, such as a retail industry solution. I think there's one for healthcare, and I think there's also one for sustainability as well. And all of those workloads are underpinned by one lake. So one lake is effectively OneDrive, but for the organization. So the concept of one lake is in its name. You have one lake for the organization where all data is stored, accessed and shared throughout the organization. And every workload uses one lake for its storage. And then what underpins everything within Microsoft Fabric from a governance perspective is the integration with Purview. So obviously Purview is a huge product, but there are elements that Fabric integrates with where you can do data classification. You can have obviously data loss prevention policies that can secure and govern what people do with the data based on their sensitivity labels, etc. Because it's a SaaS-based platform and because it's within in the Azure ecosystem, it's all secured in the same way via Microsoft Entra and obviously with RBAC and obviously more granular permissions within the platform. And I kind of wanted to just show you the roadmap for Fabric. This, believe it or not, is a very, very cut down version of the Microsoft roadmap. And what Microsoft have done, which is different to other products that obviously they provide, is that they have actually now made the roadmap for Microsoft Fabric publicly available. But the reason why I wanted to share this is that this clearly indicates where Microsoft's investment is being made. Now, obviously, you've got things such as Synapse and Data Factory still available within Azure. However, there's not many new features now coming to those products. And I think the last feature that came to Azure Synapse was actually last May, or even the May before that. And so there's a clear intent from Microsoft that all new features are being landed into Fabric and all of the investment is going into Fabric. And since it came generally available in November 2023, there's been well over 200 new features introduced into the platform, and the roadmap is a very strong roadmap that kind of gives you that 12-month view of even more features coming into the platform. And there's also specific conferences now that are associated to Fabric, one being one that's happening this week in Vienna, which is obviously FabCon, where there are a number of new announcements being made, which will be published on Microsoft's website if it isn't already. So I'll just hand over to Sam. So Sam's going to go into each of the workloads within Fabric in a bit more detail. So I'll pass over to Sam.
Thanks, Matt. So As Matt said, I'm just going to step through each of the workloads and explain how each one is used, starting with OneLake. So as Matt mentioned, OneLake is, you can think of it as your OneDrive for your data. It's one central location within your organization where you can store all of your organization's data, and everybody can have access to that data from that one location. So the idea behind this is breaking down those data silos that I'm sure we're all used to, where data is, different departments have different copies of the same data, used slightly differently, etc. OneLake is built to solve that problem, everyone using the same data. And part of the way that it aims to do that is by making OneLake easy to use. It's built on the Azure Data Lake Gen 2 storage offering that we've had in Azure for a few years now, and that enables it to store any file formats. So whether that be structured data like CSVs, or semi-structured data like JSON, or even completely unstructured data, pictures, sound files, images, those types of things. And where Microsoft see OneLake as the sort of central hub of your data, they've added some new features, or some features into Fabric that make it easy for us to get our data into OneLake. And the first of those is shortcuts. So imagine you have your data. You might already have lots of data in files. Maybe it's in an Azure Data Lake already. Maybe it's in Amazon, Google, just in SharePoint within your organization. And one of the challenges is you have to move that data into OneLake. So to avoid actually having to move that data, Microsoft have created a feature called Shortcuts, which lets us basically create shortcuts within OneLake that points to the data wherever it may exist in these existing file stores. So you don't, to start using OneLake to access your data, you don't have to actually move the data into OneLake. You can start using OneLake to access your data with your data staying where it is currently. So you think of shortcuts a lot like shortcuts in Microsoft Office, where you have a Word document, it sits in one particular folder, but you can have shortcuts on your desktop. People can have different shortcuts and different routes in to see the same data, but they're all connecting to that same data. So shortcuts enable us to get files into OneLake quickly, and the second feature that's been added is mirroring. So we don't just keep data in files, we keep it in databases. Most organizations have various different databases with data in, and mirroring allows us to create a mirror of that database directly in OneLake. So within Fabric, you see a copy of your database. It looks like it looks like a database. It has the tables that you'd expect to see in there, and it's just being continuously replicated from its location into OneLake. You don't have to set up any complex ETL routines to do that. It's just a near real-time-ish. It's up to about 10-15 minutes delayed, but real-time-ish copy of your data in Fabric. And then also, if we're using Dynamics 365 or Dataverse, we have Fabric Link, which is another simple and seamless way of copying your data from those platforms into OneLake. So we have so we can get started using OneLake without using those features to without having to move our data into OneLake. So, and just to try and illustrate that a bit more clearly, this diagram, you can see across across the middle here, we have OneLake, and we've got the folders of data, and at the bottom, sort of examples of shortcuts where we've got data in those various data stores being linked into OneLake. Over on the left-hand side, we've got our databases being mirrored into OneLake. And I didn't mean to do that, sorry. There we go. And across the top, you can see the remaining workloads within Fabric, where they all interact with that data in OneLake. So whether it's being stored directly in OneLake, it's mirrored or shortcutted into OneLake, it makes no difference to the different workloads. They just see that data as data in OneLake. Moving on to the next workloads, we have as well as having these features, there will be scenarios where we need to get data into our OneLake platform. Maybe it's not currently supported by mirroring, or we have a SaaS application with an API. But any of those scenarios, we have the data factory workload that enables us to bring data and copy it into OneLake. And within that workload, we have two options. We have data flows, which are our code-free graphical drag and drop way of building data pipelines that will take data from a data source. We can transform it, modify that data en route to OneLake, and then land the data in OneLake, all without having to write any code. If anybody's familiar with SSIS from SQL Server, it's very much like data flows in SSIS packages. It's that sort of code-free approach to data ingestion. We also have data pipelines, and they are partly sort of a graphical interface, but they scale to a more sort of enterprise petabyte scale level of performance, and they also give us the option to use code first approaches such as notebooks or SQL scripts. So with a data flow, when you're trying to transform data, you have a set number of transformations that you can drag onto the screen. As long as if you want to do something that's not in one of those transformations, you'd be looking at using a data pipeline to take that more code first approach. And secondly, as alongside bringing the data into OneLake, once it's into OneLake, we want to start using that data, transforming it, cleaning it, and we have the data engineering workload to do that. So within data engineering, this is our Spark-based notebook environment where we can execute code against our data using Python, R, Scala, or SQL. And we can use a combination of all of those within the same notebooks to ingest data, prepare it for analysis, clean it, transform it, or any other data related tasks. And throughout this data ingestion, data engineering process, the data we're storing in OneLake, the endpoints we're using to view that data would be a lakehouse. So lakehouses let us store structured and unstructured data all in one location on top of OneLake. All of the data would be in the lakehouse is stored in Delta Parquet format, and we can use all of these tools to load and work with data within our lakehouses. Slide going to move on. Matt, oh, there we go. So the data engineering and data factory workloads that I've spoken about, they are for our sort of traditional batch, once a day, overnight data loads. Fabric also gives us the real-time intelligence workload where we can start interacting with our data at much higher frequencies. So when we have real-time data, so manufacturing industry, particularly where we have lots of production lines with sensors and those types of scenarios where we've got a constant stream of data, and we need to be able to report on this data at near real-time cadences. So Fabric offers the Sorry, apologies for that. We have the real-time hub where we can interact with our real-time data. We can see can interact with our real-time data in the real-time hub to where we can see all our different streams of data. So if we have lots of Internet of Things type devices, lots of sensors, streaming data, we've got this one location where we can see all of those streams arriving in Fabric in real time. And we've also got the option there to, using features like shortcuts, we can combine it with reference data and other more static data. Sort of all is in that real-time flow through to reports and other sort of data consumption. The real-time data, I've mentioned streaming data sources, but we can also do event-driven scenarios within the real-time intelligence part of Fabric. So we don't need it if we don't have a constant stream of data. It might be when a file arrives in one lake, or when a table is updated in a database. All of these types of scenarios where we need to trigger an action based on an event, we can do that via the real-time hub. Matt, are you able to move the slides on? It's not reacting for me. Thank you. Okay, so we have data in Fabric. We've transformed, whether it's batch or real time, we've transformed it with our data engineering. We now need to present that data to the business so that they can gain insights from that data and utilize it to make informed decisions. So we have two different endpoints we can use to do this. We have data warehouses, which is for structured data, where we can model that data into our star schemas and our sort of conventional data warehouses, that work on where we have the sort of powerful sort of underlying SQL engine that allows us to query and interpret those huge volumes of data for analytical reporting. But we can also use a lakehouse. If we still want to combine structured and unstructured data, but we can use the SQL endpoints of a lakehouse to do similar analysis using SQL and present that data in a format where it can be consumed by Power BI. So Power BI is the sort of market-leading reporting tool from Microsoft, where we can build our reports and dashboards to derive those business insights and enable self-service BI, and allowing people to sort of interact with that data. And within Fabric, Power BI has also introduced a new storage mode. So previously we had just two, import and direct query, where import, the data's loaded into Power BI and performance is really fast because of that. But when data becomes too large to import into Power BI, we used direct query and had to query the data directly from the data source. Fabric has added a third option called Direct Lake, which lets us use the best of both options. So data is loaded directly into the Power BI data model. Data is not loaded. No longer, it's like direct query, it's not loaded into the Power BI data model, but because of the Delta Parquet formats used in OneLake, we can still get the same performance that we used to get with import, but don't have to load the large volumes of data into OneLake. So it's a best of both scenario with that new storage method in Fabric. And so a relatively new feature within or new workload within Fabric is SQL databases. So alongside the warehouses that we have for analytical workloads, we now have the option to create databases for our OLTP workloads. So if we can have a database that's highly transactional, lots of small inserts, updates, deletes, those application style databases, we can host them directly in Fabric. The data within those databases is replicated into OneLake. So if we can have data that is, as it's entered into the database, it's there ready in OneLake to be used downstream by other analytical systems. And alongside the SQL databases, we also have Cosmos DB offering that NoSQL schemaless data model that doing exactly the same thing. So if we have applications running off those Cosmos databases, we can host them in Fabric and have the data from those replicated into OneLake.
Great, thanks, Sam. Just to cover the kind of data science and AI workloads within Fabric, I think the fact that the data is within OneLake and it's all accessible, it does make kind of data science and supporting those data science processes a lot easier. So, for that reason, obviously, for doing kind of data exploration, data preparation, data cleansing, experimentation, kind of building those models, evaluating those models, scoring them, that's all a lot easier within Fabric. And so there's a couple of areas where you can kind of do that. So there's the basic data engineering and using notebooks, and you are able to use kind of Python libraries that might have predetermined models that you can leverage using kind of that notebook experience. But also you can reach out to other Azure services. So with the data in OneLake, you're able to use things like Azure Machine Learning to connect to that data, build those models, and actually extend kind of the machine learning capabilities using Azure Machine Learning. In the same way, you can also leverage Azure Foundry, AI Foundry, and this will open up those open AI large language models to again build those kind of generative AI solutions, leveraging data that's in OneLake. And of course, Copilot is baked into Fabric as a platform, and with Copilot, there is a Copilot within each of the workloads, and so what this provides is the ability to improve efficiencies and support end users to augment their ability, but leverage the power of Copilot. So some of the examples that we're seeing Copilot being used for is around enabling and effectively increasing their efficiency. So whether that's code generation, so you can get Copilot within data engineering to write Python code. We see that as a really good way of, if you're not familiar with Python, it's a great opportunity to upskill and use Copilot as a way of learning to help you in that journey. You can ask it to generate DAX formulas within Power BI. You can actually use Copilot to ask questions about your data within Power BI. So using natural language, you can ask Power BI questions of the data to get answers back, which is a great way of quickly finding out something if you don't want to go through and look at it in a report. But also you can get Copilot to create Power BI reports as well, which again is a great way to kind of get those efficiency gains. I suppose the caveat with Copilot is, and especially for using it with Power BI, is that obviously, like with all these workloads, there is some thought and planning into your Fabric capacity, which kind of underpins and provides the compute resources for these workloads. But more importantly, obviously with Copilot, it's within the Fabric tenant that you deploy. So therefore, your data always remains your data. It's not using a shared service where it goes outside of your organization and can be used to train models and can be used externally. So it's all secure within the platform. Something new that's in preview that has come to Fabric as well around AI is something called Data Agent. So obviously, we are kind of in this agentic AI wave at the moment, and something that Microsoft provides as a kind of no code offering is Data Agent, which allows you to build conversational Q&A systems that leverages large language models that sit over the top of the data within Fabric. And again, it allows end users to ask questions of the data, gives you that more accessible view into data where you might not necessarily understand the data that well or have the skills to write Python or SQL queries to get the answers that you need of the data. And these Q&A systems are a great way of being able to use natural language to get and explore the data that you need. And you've got kind of full control over each of the Q&A systems that you build in terms of the data that it accesses. You can have Q&A systems for specific functions, whether it's HR, whether it's finance. It's all up to you and bespoke how you want to deploy those. But of course, because it's leveraging the Fabric platform, all of the security and governance that's in place is all honoured. So people, these data agents aren't a way of being able to circumvent access. It still honours all of the controls that you've put in place, and people can only access the data that they have access to by these data agents as well. So that's something that's new and in preview, and already in September's recent feature announcement, there's been some more capability within Data Agent as well. Things such as CI/CD for data agents, and being able to extend the capabilities of that as well. That leads us quite nicely into kind of security and governance. So obviously, from a security perspective, as I mentioned in one of the opening slides, because it's within the Azure ecosystem, everything is controlled via Microsoft Entra, and also everything's kind of R-backed, controlled. And obviously within each workload, there are certain levels of permissions, more granular permissions that you can apply depending on the different workload. For example, with kind of SQL database, data warehouse, there is that capability of doing both row level and object level security as well for that more granular security mechanism that you require. And as I said, because it's on Microsoft Azure, it inherits all of the compliance standards that Azure meets. So Fabric meets all of the ISO, SOC standards, as well as HIPAA if you're in healthcare as well. So that just naturally builds on the Microsoft Azure ecosystem's compliance standards. And as I said, because it's a SaaS-based platform now, all of the patching, threat monitoring, security enhancements and updates are all taken care of, of that for you, all managed by Microsoft. So there isn't anything that you are required to manage from that perspective as an organization. It's all done for you. In terms of data protection encryption, certainly with OneLake, all data is encrypted at rest and in transit by default. Again, there's nothing that you need to do to turn that on or off. It's all done by default for you. So as you're bringing data into OneLake and as people are interacting with data, you can be rest assured that all data is encrypted within OneLake. There is the options now for certain workloads to use customer managed keys. So obviously this is now reaching out and leveraging Key Vault and those managed keys. So again, just adding that additional protection with how you interact with source systems and how you apply access and controls. As I mentioned before, kind of the authentication access control is controlled by Microsoft Entra ID. And because of that, you are able to do conditional access policies as well, similar to like you were able to do with Power BI, managed at the Entra level. So, you know, you can have policies based on where the user's location is, device, etc. Supports MFA. So all things that you would expect from an organizational enterprise platform. And then from a networking perspective, there are support for private links and managed endpoints. I know I mentioned at the start about FabCon Vienna. It's well worth following the announcements there, because there have been some big updates and announcements in that area where they've enhanced that capability further, giving you much more tighter controls around secure private endpoints, etc. And again, because obviously the actual capacity of Fabric is an Azure resource, you still have all of the controls that you would with a typical Azure resource, things such as service tagging, and obviously fine-grained controls around inbound and outbound traffic as well. Just to cover governance, as we mentioned before, because it's one single platform, within Fabric you have an admin portal, and within the admin portal, it's actually quite a big portal in terms of all of the options and settings that you have available to you that you can turn on and off. So you can be really granular with what users can and can't do within each of the different workloads and within the Fabric tenant. So there is a real level of control that you can kind of provide as kind of a tenant, domain or workspace admin. Again, just giving you that more granular governance in terms of what users can do at the different layers within Fabric. I mentioned domains. We have got a slide that covers the kind of fundamental architecture of Fabric, but effectively workspaces are areas that users collaborate and actually create Fabric items in. And then what you can do is actually group workspaces in what they call domains. So you could have multiple workspaces per domain, but domains are a great way of being able to roll up and create effectively a single view of a collection of workspaces. So that's really good if you wanted to group workspaces by a particular business unit, but then also you can apply granular access controls to that level as well. There is the concept around data discovery and trust around endorsements. So this is the ability to kind of certify Fabric items. So what that will allow end users to kind of see is that that particular Fabric item is kind of trusted and endorsed to use, and everything is visible kind of in this OneLake data hub. So that's kind of that single pane view where users can go into and actually discover Fabric items, providing they've got access to obviously see those. And you can tag items as well. Again, that's just attaching metadata to Fabric items to make it easier to discover through the OneLake data hub. Obviously, Microsoft Purview is a big product, but what Fabric has done is integrated a number of features within Fabric to give you an additional governance layer within Fabric. Obviously, I'm not going to go into all of the inner workings of Purview because we haven't got enough time. But there are some areas within Fabric now that reach out to Purview. So things like being able to classify and provide sensitivity labels on items, within Fabric is really good, especially if there is, for instance, PII data and compliant to GDPR. You're able to now classify those data items. You've got the data loss prevention policies that you can now apply. These at the moment only support Power BI semantic models, but what this allows you to do is use data loss prevention policies to automatically detect sensitive data that's uploaded into semantic models. So it gives you that kind of automated classification way of being able to label data. And then everything is logged within the Microsoft Purview audit log. So every user activity is logged, and you're able to govern to see what users are doing within the Fabric platform. And then also it ties nicely into the unified catalog within Purview. So that's kind of giving you that overall one pane view of all of your data artifacts through the unified catalog. And just quickly, in terms of monitoring compliance, there is a real-time monitoring hub within Fabric. So again, great way of being able to look at things such as usage, so you can start monitoring your capacity usage, as well as a few other things in real time to manage and govern the platform. And of course, as I mentioned before, it adheres to compliance standards such as GDPR, HIPAA, ISO, and SOC. So in terms of migrating to Fabric, I just thought I'll cover off some of the things that we're seeing, why people are starting to now adopt Microsoft Fabric. As I mentioned, we're coming up to Fabric's second birthday of it being in general availability. So it was released in November 2023. And as illustrated on the roadmap, all new features are now being released to Microsoft Fabric, which means things like Azure Synapse, although Microsoft haven't officially deprecated it, it does mean that there's no new features being released to that platform. And so, it is being left behind. And so what we're seeing now is that, organizations are wanting to adopt Fabric to take advantage of the new and latest features that are being brought into Microsoft Fabric. Another big driver was Microsoft last year announced the consolidation of Power BI premium SKUs. So with Power BI, you used to be able to purchase what they called P SKUs or premium SKUs. And this gave you dedicated capacity to host your Power BI workspaces on. And some reasons why you would do that would be to kind of extend semantic data model sizes. So under the Pro license, you were limited to a 1 gig data model. And depending on which premium tier you would go on to, that extended those data model size. And I think P1 allowed you to go up to a 10 gig data model. And as you went up through the SKUs, that increased. Obviously, Microsoft just announced that they were consolidating the P SKUs into F SKUs. And so what we're seeing now is that because in order to get what was equivalent to a P1, you have to purchase an F64. Although you can just use that to provide you with Power BI premium capacity, a lot of organizations now that have moved on to that are saying, well, we're paying for an F64. We get all of these additional Microsoft Fabric features as part of that. And so they are now looking to maximize their investment and leverage the other Fabric features, not just using it as the dedicated capacity for Power BI. And I think other organizations, and again, it all depends kind of where you are in your analytics journey and kind of the maturity around that. But the fact that Microsoft Fabric eliminates data silos, it simplifies kind of data management and the complexity of the architecture, and it covers kind of the entire data life cycle. We're seeing a lot of customers finding that a real advantage to them and really want to explore that and gain efficiencies. And again, as we said around One Lake, being able to have this one one lake for the organization to eliminate all of the data silos, data duplication, and data movement that goes on in the organization to provide analytics. And I think also, in general, Microsoft Fabric improves the governance and cost optimization. So obviously, with having a single platform, you remove all of these individual components that make up your analytics platform. And in some cases, we have seen customers achieve a reduction in their Azure expenditure because they've been able to move to a single platform and optimize their costs. So with that, unfortunately, not all of the migration to Fabric is smooth, and there are some considerations that need to be made. If you're looking at moving from your current platform to Fabric, and I appreciate that obviously what's on this slide is if you're moving to a Microsoft-based kind of platform, but this is where we see some of the challenges that can come up when looking to migrate to Fabric. From a Power BI perspective, it's actually very seamless. It's very easy. You just reassign your Power BI workspaces to your Fabric capacity. And if you have a lot of those, there is a tool that Microsoft providing in GitHub that can actually automate that as well. And we've done that for a few customers where we've moved their Power BI workspaces onto the new Fabric capacity. So actually that is fairly easy. There isn't an awful lot of work or rework that's required to do that. Microsoft have released a Fabric migration assistant. So if you're using Synapse dedicated SQL pools, so leveraging the kind of SQL engine for data warehousing, there is a Fabric migration assistant. I believe the recent announcement has made that generally available now. And so what this will do is it will assess your data warehouse within Synapse dedicated SQL pools. It will look at the metadata. It will look at whether it's compatible with Fabric, and you can do a two-stage migration. You can migrate the metadata, and then as a second phase, migrate the data into Fabric, which gives you a better migration experience than having to kind of recreate and manually do that migration. If you're transitioning from the Azure Synapse Spark engine, so using the kind of data engineering functionality within Azure Synapse, there is some refactoring of code and libraries that you need to do when moving to Fabric, and the same with Data Factory or Synapse pipelines. There is some level of refactoring. There is currently no tooling available to do that migration. One of the reasons is this kind of underlying JSON format of pipelines has changed. So within Synapse pipelines or Data Factory VD pipelines, there is this concept of linked services. Within Fabric pipelines, there is no linked services, it's connections. So kind of the underlying JSON format doesn't align. So there is a level of refactoring required if you want to move those pipelines into Fabric. It's also worth noting that if you're using Gen 1 data flows, they aren't supported within Fabric. It's only Gen 2. So there's no direct migration, unfortunately. You would have to create Gen 2 data flows and migrate or manually recreate those, unfortunately. And as Sam's mentioned when he discussed OneLake, if you've already got existing data lakes, you don't have to do data migrations if you want to move to Fabric. They can remain as they are, and you can just leverage OneLake to shortcut that data. And from an end user perspective, they can interact with that data as if the data was within the Fabric platform in OneLake. I'll just hand back over to Sam, where he can go through kind of the Fabric architecture and deployment patterns for Fabric.
Thanks, Matt. Can you advance the slides? Thanks. So the Fabric architecture is made up of four different levels. To start with, you have your tenant, which so you have your Microsoft which is really your sort of Microsoft Entra tenant, where you have you just have within an organization, you probably would just have the single tenant, and you can have a single instance of Microsoft Fabric and a single instance of OneLake at that tenant level. Within a tenant, you can create multiple capacities, as many capacities as you need. And a capacity is the compute power behind Microsoft Fabric. Regardless of which workload you're using, whether it's Data Factory, Spark, SQL, any of them, you need a capacity to use any of those features. And you can have as many capacities as you need, and they can be of varying different sizes. On a capacity, you create workspaces. So workspaces are the same as Power BI workspaces. They are the container where you hold all of the different Fabric items that you create. Workspaces can be shared between multiple users. They can easily be moved from one capacity to another. And just when you create the workspace in Fabric, you assign it to a capacity. Then within your workspaces, you create all your items, whether that's notebooks, databases, lakehouses, Power BI reports, whatever the item is, they live in a workspace which is on a capacity. As Matt's previously mentioned, we have the workspaces can be logically grouped together in domains, so admins can easily manage and track multiple workspaces that are used by similar workloads. And there's several different deployment patterns for workspaces that offer varying levels of flexibility, security, scale, and governance depending on your requirements. First of which is you can deploy everything into a single workspace. So here we've got our tenant, we've got a single capacity with one workspace, and outside of that workspace, you have OneLake. This simple to set up, fast to get started. All your data is in it's in one workspace on a single capacity, will be in a single region. Potentially useful for small development teams. It's not going to be able to scale out and give you the flexibility around security levels. Yeah, if everything's in one workspace, there's people either have access to the workspace or they don't. Features such as CI/CD are going to be difficult to implement with the flexibility you require, and I think that's the key points on that. So generally, most people will be looking at multiple workspaces. So here we have a pattern where you can have multiple workspaces on a single capacity. Both are connecting to OneLake. This lets you, it still keeps all your data in a single region, but it gives you more options and governance around security. People can access workspace A but not workspace B, vice versa. You can hook each workspace up to DevOps and have different DevOps processes around the workspaces, and so it can provide that separation that different business units and workloads need. And so you can sort of then do independent releases. Yeah, workspace A can be moved to production without workspace B, etc. But the sort of limitation here is everything is still within that single geography. And the final pattern you can have is multiple workspaces across multiple capacities. So here we can start introducing the multiple capacities. So capacities can be in different regions. So we can start having that geographical split of keeping some data in certain geographies, other data in different geographies. This also allows us to control our manage our Fabric compute levels. So a capacity is our compute for our workloads. In this example here, anything running in workspace C on capacity B is going to have its own set of compute, completely separate from capacity A. So if we've got a workload with particularly high demand, we can keep that on its own capacity with its own resource, separate from interfering with other workloads. This would also support our sort of security and governance, flexibility, and give us that flexibility we need around CI/CD and other such processes. And I think final slide, just to talk about with design patterns, is a question we're often asked is, when should I use a lakehouse versus when should I use a warehouse? And really, there is no right or wrong answer, but a sort of a useful guide to when you should use which is, how do you want, sort of asking these three questions, how do you want to do your development? If you're familiar with SQL and don't know Spark or Python, a warehouse would be a good option. If you're familiar with Spark, want to use Python, go down the lakehouse route. For your data warehousing, do you need multi-table transactions like we would have in traditional databases? If so, warehouse. If not, a lakehouse could be an option. And also the complexity of your data. If you're only using structured data warehouses, but if you've got any unstructured, semi-structured data, or you're unsure about that, lakehouse will accommodate all of those needs.
Perfect. Okay, we have not very long left and quite a lot of questions in the Q&A. So I'll just preface with anyone's question that we don't get to in this session, we will follow up with you separately to answer your questions as well. And let's dive straight in. So the first question we have is around the licensing models for Fabric and what they look like.
Yes. Okay, I know we've kind of briefly mentioned it, but yeah, so Fabric operates under a SKU-based license model, distinguished by what they call FSKUs. So it's split into two areas. So you've got storage and compute that are separated. So for one lake, you pay for the storage that you need or use, and from the compute perspective, you will purchase an FSKU. Obviously, the pricing is available on Microsoft's website. There's two options in terms of how you purchase your FSKU. You can do pay as you go, and that is the more expensive option. Or you can do a 1 year reserve price, which typically gets you around about 40, maybe slightly higher depending on the conversion rate, but it's around about a 40% saving reduction on your SKU. So yeah, what we typically advise is that, you know, if you know the SKU that you're going to run on, then, you know, reserve pricing is definitely the way to go, because you get those savings. And I think the lowest SKU you can purchase an F2, and it can go all the way up to, I think, a 2048, which is obviously at the extreme end from a compute perspective. And as Stan mentioned already, you can purchase multiple capacities to isolate workloads or dedicate capacity to certain workloads, whether that's, you know, your dev, test, production environments, or whether that particular workloads, you know, whether it's your data engineering or your data warehousing workloads. Power BI licensing is separate. So although Power BI is kind of within the Fabric platform, Power BI licensing from an end user perspective is still separate. So you still have to have a pro license in order to do the report authoring part of Power BI. There's still obviously the premium. So if you're not on an F64 and you're using the Power BI premium base workspaces license model, then obviously there's still the pro and the premium user licenses available to you that you purchase separately on a user by user basis as well. So that is all still separate.
Thank you very much. So next question is there an industry standard approach for migrating an on-premise star schema data warehouse into Fabric? Stunned silence there.
Short answer would be no. If it's an on-premise database, you're using I'm going to assume SQL Server, and the database engine that is a warehouse in Fabric is what was Azure Data Warehouse. It's the what Microsoft have called the massively parallel processing engine. So it's a slightly different version of SQL, and the language and the feature comparisons are not identical. So it is a case of you need to review what your data warehouse does currently and sort of put together a plan of how to migrate it into Fabric. There's not a one size fits all sort of standard solution.
Yeah, there is documentation on Microsoft's website around some of the limitations around the SQL Server part of Fabric or data warehouse. And so, a couple of examples, identity columns, for instance, are not supported in data warehouse. And if you're using those, then obviously that wouldn't necessarily give you that seamless migration into Fabric. But the core concept of a star schema will still remain, your facts and dimensions. But obviously, it just needs to be, as Sam said, planned and evaluated in terms of, what's supported within Fabric.
Okay, we'll do one more question and then we'll end up, because I'm aware that we are running over. So Joseph has asked, given that one lake applies to the whole tenant, what's the best practice around segmenting dev, test and prod environments? Separate capacities within one tenant or have them in distinct tenants?
So in terms of how you should segregate your workspaces, I could talk for a whole hour on that subject, but very quickly, you could have within one lake, because you access the data in one lake through lake houses or warehouses or databases, you could have a dev workspace, a test workspace, a prod workspace, each with their own lakehouse in them with your dev, test, prod data. And how you assign users access to those workspaces and those lakehouses will determine who has access to your dev, test, prod data. They could all sit on a single all those workspaces could sit on a single capacity. You could move them onto individual capacities. I mean, it might make sense that have non-production and production separate capacities for separate compute reasons. You don't have to. It's but it definitely could all stay within one tenant and one version of one lake.
Great.
Hope that
Thank
answers
you,
the question.
Sam. Anyone whose questions we haven't managed to get to, we will follow up with you separately. We'll have your emails from when you registered, so we'll make sure to reach out to you. Matt, I think, did you have one more slide and then we'll wrap up?
Yeah, just to kind of finish off, obviously, some of the kind of offerings that we provide customers to help kind of them on this journey, is one, we call it the transformation analytics workshop. So this is where it's free of charge, but we will come in and we will have a discussion around what your current data strategy is, how that supports the overall or overarching business strategy, but get down into kind of the weeds of the use cases, whether that is a greenfield deployment of Fabric and delivering some use cases to the business, or whether that is a case of taking your current platform and moving that into Fabric. The idea of these sessions is how can we bring that to life? How can we tackle that as a piece of work? And they're really good. Really good if they're in person. It can be really collaborative, really interactive. So that's one way that we can help. in terms of next steps. And then the other one is something that we offer, which is Microsoft Fabric in 5. So this really leads on to kind of Fabric Analyst in a Day that we provide on behalf of Microsoft as well. We work with them to provide a one-day training on Fabric. But this is really kind of putting Fabric into life using your data. So it's a very quick way of going end to end with a single data source that we can take from source into Fabric, use some of the Fabric workloads to transform and cleanse that data, and then visualize it in Power BI. And it just gives you a nice way, or rather than using a data set that's not applicable to you for training purposes, you can actually get to see Fabric working with your data. So that's another nice offering that we can provide as well.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you to everyone for joining. Thank you to Matt and Sam for being our speakers today. Look out for, watch your inboxes for the recording and some follow-up information. And we hope to see you on the next one. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.